lag. So I'm just going to tap on the thing for now. So it is important to consider that our training lags significantly behind theory out there, even in psychodynamic theories and relational psychoanalysis. There's been a shift across the field in theory of saying, you know, we are people in the room. That the arbitrary stereotypical responses that happen when people are disclosing something personally feel alienating. That people want us to be human, that people respond best to therapies when we're human. B.F. Skinner, who is really responsible for a lot of current waves in behavioral psychotherapy, wrote in his book, Walden 2, "What is love except another name for the use of positive reinforcement, or vice versa?" It's a little simplistic, but still, it's that idea that that we shape one another's behavior through engaging in a loving way. Okay. So it's important to consider a core feature of FAP as natural reinforcement. The natural reinforcement is not, I always think of the stereotype of like the behavior therapist decades ago that sort of, you know, cram a Skittle or an M&M into a kid's mouth right after they do something that's an appropriate response. No. Anyway, I'm going to do the thing. There's a lag, and then I don't know where I am. Okay. But in functional analytic psychotherapy, we're really trying to use ourselves and our own authenticity as the tool of reinforcement to shape behavior. So for a little bit of history, FAP labels itself a neo-Skinnerian approach to considering the therapeutic relationship. So built on Skinner, but not restricted to what Skinner had written. So they start with we start with the basic tools of a functional analysis or a behavior analysis, and apply them to understanding what's the interaction happening between me and the human being in front of me right now. When you think way back to your learning theory courses on reinforcement and punishment and contingencies of learning and stimulus control, how do you apply that just to you and me in a room? It's a close cousin of acceptance and commitment therapy. It's not COVID, it was lots of cigarettes at Lisbon Pride the other night. So it's a close cousin of ACT. Actually, the co-founders of FAP, Bob Kohlenberg and Mavis Saya, Bob's daughter Barbara, studied under Steve Hayes, who created ACT. So if you've gone to an ACT workshop and there's overlap, that's probably why she invited them to hear him talk before he'd written his book, and then that inspired Bob and Mavis to write their book about FAP, and so these things are all kind of closely overlapping. But it started, the line of research that Bob and Mavis were doing, started as an attempt to better understand the idea of a master clinician. So one of the puzzles that's bothered psychotherapy researchers for decades is that when you look at the history of psychotherapy research, even though you get this sort of regression toward the mean when we look at large-scale studies that are trying to compare what's the best psychotherapy, typically the founders of these therapies have phenomenal stories and well-documented ones of people who went to them for therapy and really thrived. It wasn't just that they no longer met criteria and the recent ICD code that they qualified for. It's that they actually experienced a life that was richer, that was fuller, they made major changes. And so this is what they were attempting to understand. With an emphasis on the idea that moment-to-moment behaviors in a session might be the key, that the reinforcement through natural closeness might be the core task of a therapist. There's a great study published by Truex in 1968 where he randomly gave little transcripts from different sessions to a pool of therapists to have them rate, you know, is this person contingently reinforcing the client, and what are they reinforcing them for? It's higher to rate of reliability, they all agreed, okay, when you look at how the clinician's responding, he's only actually particularly enthusiastic when they're talking about growth, talking about closeness, talking about human value. And then sort of the punchline and why this got published was that every transcript he used was just from a different published transcript from Carl Rogers, who was, of course, the person who promoted the idea of unconditional positive regard. Even he appeared to be contingently responding, only most reinforcing those things that promoted closeness. So what are the assumptions of that? Well, we assume that it is a behavioral therapy, so the focus is not on insight. So our clients might say, as they think about what happened in session, I'm tying it to this history and these things that have happened to me, but that's not the goal of the therapy. We're trying to think in terms of always reinforcing a new behavior, always reinforcing and following or tracking those behavior changes to see if they're changing in the trajectory that we believe we're reinforcing, because if not, then we're not doing that. It rejects the notion of transference, because from a behavioral lens, you're two people in a room. This is always behavior that's in response to stimuli in the room. So in fact, we consider that it's always a real relationship, that our histories have led us to learn certain things, but our clients are always authentically responding to us in the moment. And so it would be considered counter to the principles of FAP to maybe take a stance like in some dynamic approaches of saying, I don't think you're responding to me. I think you're responding to something else. FAP says they're always responding to you. So it's a heavy lift for a therapist. It's present-based. So the idea in contemporary behavior therapies is that, yes, our past affect us, our childhoods, our traumas, our health history, but they affect us to the degree that we're feeling them right now. They affect us to the degree that we're having them evoked right now in this moment. And then the ultimate emphasis is on contingent responding. So it's the degree to which we're able to quickly and efficiently respond in a reinforcing manner to signs of growth in our client, that we're tracking these systematically to see if we did, in fact, reinforce, if that behavior increases over time, or if the things that we believe are reinforcing are punishing for this client. So an example could be if you have found that with many of your clients, sharing elements of your history can be very reinforcing and could lead to greater vulnerability on the part of your clients that's generalizing outside of the room, you're going to encounter a client where they will feel overwhelmed or flooded, or the emotions might feel too intense if you were to start disclosing too soon in therapy. So you also want to track your own behaviors.